Welcome to the Hohman Design podcast. I'm Tom Hohman. I'm back with Luke and Kevin for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about makerspaces. First, I wanted to show you guys something my friend Taylor just brought me. This is kind of one of the most unnecessary things you've ever seen, but utterly delightful. If you're in a situation where you need its contents to be preserved and protected in some way, I think this bulletproof thing's pretty amazing. Like this is ready to be clipped over a ballistic plate or your spacesuit or something. Any guesses as to what it contains?
A cigarette.
I
think it's a pencil.
I thought an EpiPen.
I think it's a cigarette.
He knew we were going to be doing the podcast, and I said that's how so I can develop a persona for the podcast. It would be a straight injection of adrenaline to the heart.
A Sharpie.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
It's a weapons grade Sharpie.
It
is a weapons grade Sharpie. Look at this.
The national stock number.
That's
so
too cool.
Insert it into the top half.
All right, so for our audio only listeners, it looks like a mag light, one of the little small mag lights that take AA batteries, but it houses a Sharpie, and there's gaskets and there's knurled aluminum aspects for gripping.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
When the whole thing's closed up, it could be almost anything.
Check out that fastener that holds on the
got
pocket clip.
It's got an Allen screw on the end that holds the little pocket clip to the cap. It's all looks like aircraft grade aluminum from end to end.
And it even has a little bit of thread treatment on the tail end here, so the cap has somewhere to be.
I wanted to know what that was. You're absolutely right. So I seriously, that was my primary problem with the whole thing last night. I kept thumbing that one thread.
Yes.
And I was like, it's not...
Doesn't do anything, right?
Working with the rest of the whole... Amazing. So now I want to spray paint this thing black and then sand it back down to silver and end up with the patina.
Yeah,
I feel like it deserves.
Heavy use.
Or anodize it,
Yeah, or maybe keep one silver, get a second one, spray it black and wash it down, and put my silver Sharpie in that one.
The silver one.
So the silver's I would put the silver in the black and the black in the silver, but...
Sure.
Yeah, that's pretty great. It looks very Hollywood prop for a...
It must be its appeal to so some of our vendors here in Richmond, some of these... multi-generational Virginia guys that are running their family sheet metal shop, when they see me coming, they say, "Oh no, Hollywood's here. What's he gonna want?"
Right. Hide your milling machine.
Yeah. They go, "I suppose you're gonna want some fries with this."
Right.
So we're talking about makerspaces today, and I want to ask you guys what kind of makerspaces did you grow up with? What was your first makerspace? Did you have a family garage? Did your dad have a tool bench? Or was it on a job site or high school shop class? Let's talk about our first makerspaces to start with.
We had a basement where my dad had a nice workbench, tools, and you're down there with a furnace and a water heater and some other things that make sense as a tool space. But I remember my father getting laid off from work, coming home, and I had no idea why he was home early. It must have been during the summer. I wasn't in school. I just knew that Dad was home hours before he should be. So I said, let's go make something. And even though my dad had no idea what he was going to do, and this was a big turning point in his life, we went in the basement and made a workbench for me over the next few days. Because now he had the time. And we made myself a miniature version of his workbench with drawers and a pegboard backsplash. It was great.
How old were you?
6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Made to be a maker.
Man.
Wow.
In the basement.
Fighting back a tear.
That's something to aspire to, being that kind of parent.
Yeah. So all of his concerns and frustrations for how to supply take care of the family, provide for the family. He put that
started with making sure you had a workbench.
He probably cautioned me, don't get hurt down here. We can't do anything about it.
Right. My father worked from home, and I was homeschooled. So we, as a family, we were always together, every day, all day, And as a grown-up parent now, that just seems like an impossible sacrifice to make, to be never away from the others. He did design work for electronic systems and printed circuit boards, that kind of thing. And he had a garage that was a finished garage, closed in, that was separate from the house. And I'd be out there 10 times a day asking him, how does such and such work? Can you design the little circuit to do something for me so I can build it? Or can you help me do some mechanical or electronic thing? And at night, when he was not working, I'd be sitting at his desk messing with his tools and messing up his stuff. Soldering directly on his desk and burning holes in it, that kind of thing. But it was his real workspace that I would go and mess up, and he was always patient about not yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We grew up in Foster City, California, and I remember in our garage, Dad getting his workbench, and it was a sheet metal steel, probably like a Sears type thing, a couple sheets of 3/4 inch plywood and some steel legs and a pre-assembled, half-assembled kind of thing that you finish at home. I guess it's early flat pack, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so he put that together, and it definitely felt like that this thing was happening, like the space was being created, and it would be the center of activity for things around the house. I didn't really know exactly what they were going to be. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a project associated with it, so that immediately we set to work doing something. One of the things I remember that I think came along at the same time was a little drawer of fasteners. Mm.
Yeah.
And it was had plastic drawers that went into not MDF, but like a chipboard, like a lower grade, if such a thing was possible. A cabinet with plastic drawers, and there were little, I always want to say melamine, brown like pegboard, masonite,
yeah.
masonite dividers in the plastic drawers. But all I remember is we had these bullet-shaped anchors that literally looked like a shell casing. I mean, they had a rim around the back, they had a needle tip, mm-hmm. and they had a red band that almost looked like a tracer round. So, I mean, I was fascinated with these anchors and a bunch of other stuff. We had butterfly anchors in one drawer. And looking back, this was homeowner grade at best. The whole thing, the collection of tools, the bench, and the drawer of fasteners. But at my age, I mean, I didn't know the scene. It felt like I was at NASA and we were ready to, assemble an Apollo mission. So it definitely set something in motion.
Yeah.
And I've gone on to always, I think, want to pursue it to its end. But looking back on it, it was probably pretty humble beginnings. And my dad wasn't particularly focused on being handy at all. I know he engineers as fathers. My dad was in sales, and so he always made the best effort to keep me well supplied with Legos and erector sets and other things. But I didn't really have it at home. I think my first exposure to a makerspace might have been in college at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. They had an area called the Fishbowl, and it was like a senior studio where they would sculpt the clay models in the automotive design school, and all the sketches would be up on different, I think, moving dividers, because it was a fishbowl. It was glass walls all the way around, looking in on the studio, and the whole place indelibly and 24/7 smells like Bondo. Mm-hmm. And so finally getting to Art Center, and then being at the Fishbowl, looking at the upperclassmen, looking at these projects and the smell of Bondo. I remember going back and touring Art Center 10, 15 years later, maybe longer, and walking in the door. It was like, bam! There's like that smell of inspiration, and I've been smelling it every time I open a can of Bondo. It reminds me of being at Art Center and finally being in a world-class making space where they were doing the clay models. They had a paint booth and other things that were like the stuff of my dreams. So
that's such a
finally got there.
wonderful association for the smell of Bondo, because to me, the smell of Bondo is what I smell after I hit something. It's a regret smell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about when you got to your first working space? So I know
You mean functional or professional?
Professional
Okay.
professional working spaces as they developed independently from any personal maker spaces you may have had simultaneously or previously.
Yeah. My first real job was at an architecture company, and these were very creative people, and they worked very hard, and they designed things, but it was all done in the computer, and it was all in flat file. There wasn't anything magical about the space. So I think when I switched over into chemical engineering and was in a real laboratory, that would be a maker's space. And it doesn't look all that inviting because things are often stored away in drawers and the machinery is kind of hard to understand. If you weren't from that world, you wouldn't know what to do there. But once you get used to that world and you walk in the door to the lab, it really does cry out for you to come make something.
Potential.
Yeah.
It's like in fact, I was even wondering if when you described the relatively empty space, the fact if it's cabinets and doors and
Yes.
drawers and a clean room
Everything's stored,
environment
everything's
to
on
whatever
pegboards,
degree,
empty
not
fume
a
hoods.
technical clean room, but
Right.
it must have been pregnant with a certain amount of possibility.
Oh, that glassware,
Yeah.
ready,
All that
to, ready
glassware,
to be
yeah,
used.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
My dad did some contract work for an elevator company that's based here in Richmond, and they no longer exist, but I think it was a Virginia elevator, and he did a bunch of design work that basically retrofitted Otis elevator controls, the mechanical controls for old Otis elevators with microprocessors. So these people that he was working for, they were an elevator shop. They did escalators and elevators of all types, small, big, and they had bowling alley lane made into Workbench all around in their shop, and it was well organized, and it was at a height. It was good for standing, and everything was organized. And I was probably, I don't know, 11, 12 years old when I first got to walk into that, and you'd see spools of wire that are on some way to pull them out. Whatever kind of wire you wanted, it was all there, ready to go, and it was ways to measure it out on the floor, and it was all this purpose-built tooling for the elevator maintenance and installation trade. And seeing people that knew how to use tools and keep a space organized that was not the way I personally do is inspiring as a kid. So I think that was my first exposure to a making shop space that was eye-opening.
Professionally, being in the film industry, we're all freelancers. So I never had a permanent shop space, even though I was a lifelong professional maker. What we would do would be to set up a truck and or a shop for every project. So it starts with having everything being mobile. So my entire shop was organized into tilt lid bins, which is industry standard, and we built shelves to the depth of those bins that were designed to fit right into a box truck. So the commercial would come along, the project would come along, whether it was a couple days, a couple weeks, or a couple months. We'd get our rental truck, we'd go to the storage unit, we'd install our shelving, install all of our bins of supplies, and it was adhesives and fastening equipment and some tools, depending on whether it was just a build or whether it was a set decorating gig. But everything that I had was designed to be mobile. So my table saw on a stand, my air compressor is a wheelbarrow style compressor. Everything was ready to roll on and off of a truck. Sometimes we'd load it into a sound stage for an extended stay, and kind of set up a carpentry shop typically. But it was doing it on the truck. And then I had gotten the offer to come be on the effects, part of the effects crew for a Navy SEALs docudrama reenactment program, I think called Navy SEALs on Discovery. And it didn't end up panning out for me, but in anticipation of being on that show, I had a custom built trailer made by Pace American. And I don't know if you guys remember the early days of ACR that I rolled up in that 20-foot long white trailer. I loved designing that thing, and I wish it had come to fruition, or that I had been able to afford something to tow it, so that it was mostly ended up being parked. When I got a project, we'd rent a vehicle, we'd get to bring it somewhere and set up shop. So it served its purpose. It was mostly it became my storage unit. Instead of, I had a storage unit before, and I had a storage unit after the trailer, but for about a decade or more, I operated out of the trailer. I had a built-in generator box. It was pre-wired for air conditioning. It had a full walk-on roof with fold-down escape hatch ladder. I had spare tire compartments, as many as could fit in the trailer, subfloor spare tire containers, which were the exact height of a gallon of paint. So I could store about 30 gallons into every underfloor compartment. And I took the duckbill out of the trailer, which you would use to roll on a car, and just made it a square bottom, because instead it was a shop space. But we had a fold down walk-in back door, and it had kind of some other cool package. I had an extended tongue made because I planned to put either an air compressor, a generator, and a storage box, a diamond plate storage box, all out on the extended tongue. And we didn't get around to that either before I finally was done with the trailer. But that was my shop until I came to Richmond to start Hohman Design, and ended up across the street here in the first space over with an amazing 6,000 square foot studio where we built the cyc wall for film and photography. And that the shop space didn't quite, I know you guys helped me quite a bit wiring that up with we didn't do 3-phase, right? We just had to do some 220 for the
single phase 220.
Yeah, okay.
Just for lighting and some other stuff.
Yeah, we did the table saw and the air conditioner both needed, I think, 220.
Yeah. Did the mobile shop have a countertop space in it?
So that was all, I mean, I had it all drawn out. The bench ended up just being some de facto stuff stored around in it, and it was so full of tools it needed to spread out onto a location or into a shop space or sound
fully
stage.
self-contained.
It wasn't
shop.
ready for me to work out of. That was the plan if we had gone on to work on that show, and I was going to do stainless steel countertops with Pirelli flooring, like Armstrong tiles with little disc tread pattern. That was I think Pirelli was the original designer of that flooring style. So that was the goal there. But I didn't get to work out of it as much. Once my tools were emptied out of it, I'd often set my desk up inside it and use it as like the mobile office, and do it that way.
I had a Makerspace out of my garage for a long time as well. So I had 3 vehicle bays, but one of the vehicle bays was sort of really generous and had enough room on the sides for tables and storage, and it was always a hopeless mess. But it was big enough that I could also carry a lot of waste materials, leftover pieces of things, plywood, rod stock, whatever, and make whatever I wanted, but I always had to make it in the backyard.
On sawhorses.
On sawhorses. So you would get this inspiration. You'd have this moment where you think, "Oh, this would be so much fun. quick," and you end up with 3 breakers worth of extension cords going into the yard, sawhorses everywhere.
It's getting dark. The mosquitoes are coming out.
Yeah.
Was that a
these.
drop?
Was that a drop of rain? Yeah. And then you end up just cramming the half-finished project back into the garage so it's not in the rain.
Yeah.
And you're always working around the cars.
Yep.
And if the project had nothing to do with the cars were annoying, the cars were in the way. So
you had a motorcycle in there too, didn't you?
There's a motorcycle in there. There's plenty of things to be knocked over.
The Thing was in there?
The Volkswagen was in there. A couple of Jeeps and buckets.
In various states of assemblage.
Yeah, exactly. Parts moving back and forth between the Jeeps.
What was the Nuke Alert space like? Can you talk about the project a little
okay,
bit
so
and the space that you guys developed for that?
Okay, that's a good example of a makerspace. So my dad, again, I always go back to my dad, is such an inspiration for making and designing and doing. He was a X-ray and ultrasound medical technician, equipment technician back in the early 80s. He would go around and service these nuclear pieces of equipment for a company called Picker. And so he got a lot of experience dealing with X-rays and dangerous nuclides and dangerous invisible things that you are going to hurt you, but you don't know they're happening. And they all wore film badges back then, so you would have it developed, and a month later you'd find out that you got a substantial exposure and you're done for the year. And what he wanted was some kind of little gadget that would live chirp at you when you're getting exposure to some kind of radiation that's dangerous, or a level of radiation that will accumulate fast enough to be significant in your life. You're always getting radiation from all kinds of sources, mostly extraterrestrial, but the thing that can really hurt you in that setting is unshielded X-rays or radiotherapy, like radioactive therapy for cancer. The isotopes they use, like cobalt and cesium, if they're not shielded properly or they leak out of whatever their containment is, you would never know it. You wouldn't smell it or see it, but you'd be exposed to a kind of radiation that hurts you. Anyway, so he designed this little gadget that would chirp at you when it was exposed to X-rays. And he never could get anybody in the medical field to get excited about it. But he had the prototype, and he wore it to work every day, and it worked. It would beep at you if it was exposed to X-rays. And about 1998, years later, he hooked up with this guy who was kind of in the prepper world of selling old surplus Geiger counters and MREs and gas masks and that kind of thing. And this guy had an idea that he wanted to fund the development of such a little gadget. So they developed the Nuke Alert. It was my dad and his brother and this investor, a guy named Shane from Texas, and the three of them developed a commercial version of the prototype that my dad had done way back in the 80s. And it was called the Nuke Alert. And it was a sealed little plastic box that had a 10-year battery in it. And the way it worked was a cadmium sulfide cell. And when the X-rays hit the phosphorus inside this little cell, it would generate a visible light, and the electronics in there would pick up on the light, and they would there was a microprocessor that would measure the amount of light being produced, and it would chirp at you. It worked fine enough, and they weren't terribly sensitive, so that was always the complaint, was we need something more sensitive. It wasn't a Geiger counter, it was a scintillation counter, so it wasn't sensitive to real low levels of radiation.
Now, is that what like submariners wear, or folks that are working close to a nuclear reactor, they'll wear something on their belt?
Electronic device?
I don't think so. I don't think it's film, and I don't know that it's electronic. What other kind of radiation sensors are there?
So you can have a Geiger tube, a Geiger counter, that is going to give you an electronic signal to tell you that radiation is in your area. The film badges, the problem is the delay. You got to go develop that somewhere.
Do you know how they measure it for pilots?
Exposure?
Yeah.
No, I don't know what they're currently doing in the military.
Okay, because I know. Well, even for civilian pilots that fly northern routes.
Yes, your exposure is much higher.
Are measured
at those
for
altitudes.
radiation over a career.
So
they do that.
We had a cottage industry in my family for several years building these things. At my uncle's house, we got a shed, one of those little sheds that you can sit on non-permanent mounting, so the county can't tell you that it's not permanent. And we set up production in this little building. We had all these custom-made tools for jigs that the devices would go into, and sonic weld the two halves together, and all kinds of testing. And my part in that whole deal was designing the testing system that would actually expose a batch of these things to an industrial X-ray, 16 at a time, and listen to them chirping. And the way we did it was we had neoprene foam, like is used in a wetsuit, thick neoprene foam, like 3/4 inch thick. I had it laser cut in a little pattern where the nuclear device would slip down into that little tombstone shaped cutout in the neoprene foam, and there was a microphone embedded at the bottom of the cutout, and there were 16 microphones in this array, and they all went to a circuit I designed to discriminate between chirping and not chirping and actually count the number of chirps. And then we had a thing I wrote in Visual Basic running on a laptop sitting on top of the X-ray that would tell a relay to kick on the X-ray and blast these things at some outrageous amount of rate, a dose rate that would be pretty serious for a human if you were inside the box with these things. So the way it worked is the computer would kick off this scripted process of load all the devices in, and there was a barcode on a unique barcode printed on each one, and there was a barcode reader that we would scan each one into their little slot, stick the whole tray of these things on their umbilical cord up into the X-ray machine, shut the door, hit the button. It would zap them, and the computer would listen to all 16 microphones, and it would count each little station was being counted how many chirps. And the way the nuclear works is it's an exponential logarithmic scale. So one chirp is the lowest amount of radiation it can detect. 2 chirps is twice that. 3 chirps is twice that again. So it's exponential, log 2, binary, and it would hit it at several different levels and verify that every single device in the array was within a band of operable. But that space became that we did all that, and we had the X-ray in there. We had all kinds of things like laser engravers and all of these tools that were, milling machines and lathes and drill presses and things that weren't exactly part of the process. They were kind of tangential to tinkering with this project, and that became a really fun space to be in.
Did you get to be a part of developing the space, or were you kind of just like hey, what's this laser thing for? Like stuff kept showing up to your delight?
I was part of developing. So my dad and my uncle would say, all right, we need some solution to this problem. The problem would be like the batteries are coming in and they're not consistent. So we need to build a little jig that we can slip the batteries into 100 at a time and measure them, because we're cranking through thousands of these devices. So I was part of the decisions of what to buy and how to build it. My uncle is a tinkerer to the nth degree. So he was always out there building all kinds of custom-made tool solutions to these problems. But that's probably one of the most extreme Makerspace situations I've been involved in, where there was an angel investor that was remote, pouring money on us to get production up to nearly industrial scale of these devices.
And quality and consistency
too. Yeah.
Because you're spending time and energy and talent on getting things to be reproducible, getting things to be reliable. Something that cottage industry doesn't always get into. Yeah,
we made 50,000 of these devices when it was all said and done.
Wow.
And we actually have records of them and test data for them. And it wasn't done perfectly, but it was done. When I look back on it, we did, with the resources we had, a decent job of making a real instrument that was worth what the money that people paid for it.
Have you got multiple types of spaces for different making that you've done? Now, I know your situation's kind of recently changed and going in exciting new directions, but your last set of Makerspaces, I know you had the garage, and it not only had its own kind of separate spaces, but Luke, you've got like at home, you've got an electronics workbench.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, you had a room off to the side of one of your rooms.
That was a workshop as well for electronics work, soldering, little measurements, little research. It's the kind of place where you would combine smallish tools with books that needed to be brought into a process. It was the kind of place where you'd have a small pile of hand tools, the thing you're trying to do, and then maybe a book or two on a stand where you can refer to it, because you were moving between them constantly. One moment you're reaching for the little side cutters, and the other moment you're trying to remember what was in chapter 3 because I don't know how this works anymore.
I'd be remiss. Something's coming back to me now that belonged right at the top of the episode, which is, I think my first exposure to a makerspace that affected me for life was Mr. Rogers.
Really?
Oh.
Mr. Rogers had a kitchen island that was like his makerspace where he did a certain number of projects. And now I'm not recalling it correctly, but I think right out the kitchen door, there was an outdoor island, and it flipped over, or it had a removable lid, and it had a benchtop sandbox in it. So when he did things like build a little bridge with like a plank going across a road that returned back under itself or something, he would do that at benchtop height in a benchtop height sandbox. And he always had Tupperware that was being used for things other than food, And I just remember like going, man, this guy's really living.
Yeah, right.
I was like, I want to see everything through those eyes. I mean, there's so much possibility. I never knew what could happen next, because the things that you recognized would almost certainly then be used in a way that you weren't, expecting. A flour sifter used to distribute sand in the play box or something. I don't know. But man, did that have an effect. And to this day, I know you guys both know of my project.
The Power Hood.
The Power Hood, but the Dream Table. I've got a working project called the Dream Table, and I'm collecting some blocks, very much inspired by Mr. Rogers, and the notion that this benchtop table height ideation space will be there to explain things and explore things and design things, ultimately engineer things quite seriously. But starting with even just the most simplest ideation and three-dimensional communication and working out problems in space, almost with children's toys. That started then, and it's still underway today. And man, thinking
Still
of
going
maker
there.
spaces, that's a complete circle.
I really hope there's no revelation that Mr. Rogers was a bad guy after all.
I know. There's two. He and Billy Graham,
Right.
frankly, are like two major public figures who I know were very deliberate, from what we know, in their careers, to make sure that their whole organization was sound, that their personal behavior, that the witnesses that they always kept close at hand, you know what I mean?
Integrity.
To preserve
Above
the
question,
integrity and rigor was really impressive lives. And I hope that stays true forever.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have
a friend of mine, sorry to interrupt, but a friend of mine, Ralph, who now is out in LA, and he's an important part of the organization, the guy who directed The Firm. Why I can't think of his
Grisham?
name right now. We need to... No,
Grisham wrote it.
Shucks, yeah, it's okay. Sidney Pollack. Sorry.
Okay.
Who's worked with Sidney Pollack, and now he's an executive, I think, at that company or derivative of that company. But Ralph worked for Fred Rogers, and it was at 30 Rock.
in New York City?
In New York City, and he had the whole floor. The Mr. Rogers show had that floor.
Really?
And people said that when you stepped out onto the floor, that his whole enterprise was located on, that it was a completely different world. It was like going into a library or something, that the peace and the calm that presided over the floor was different from any other place he could go on
Really?
30 Rock,
Wow.
and that frequently the predominant sound was of his composition on the piano. 'Cause
Really?
Of course, he
Yeah.
played and he composed all the music in the show and a lot more as well. So,
Huh.
and he was a beloved character by him and those that worked with him. So I hope that's my little insight into the fact that it was true, top to bottom.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't just an act.
But what an influence
Hold
on
on.
me. I remember when he passed away. It's the only letter to the editor kind of thing I've ever done. But I think I wrote. Somebody was soliciting, what are your memories or whatever. And I was immediately compelled to write my eulogy for Fred
Wow.
Rogers.
Wow.
At my current job, I'm an IT guy for a auto parts manufacturer, and we just took possession of some air filter manufacturing equipment. And one of the main pieces of equipment was a media pleating machine, and it came in a huge crate, 12 feet long and 6 feet high and 7 feet wide. And we had the lid of this crate. It's all hardwood. It's these planks of oak, and I couldn't bear to see it thrown away, so I made a table out of it. And I put 4x4s up under it and carpeted it with a remnant that Lowe's had. And in our organization, as we're developing through the process of laying out this manufacturing area and figuring out how we're going to place machines and who's going to do what and how we're going to organize, that table has become the centerpiece of everything we do. Everybody kind of gravitates towards it, and they lean into it, and they open up a laptop on it, and they lay out, here's this air filter we're going to make, and we put it on the table, and calipers laying around. But that central gathering space is a key component of creativity. A place that's not covered in junk, that's ready to receive a bunch of people to lean around and gather as a group and say, okay, let me take this physical three-dimensional thing and show you people around me. We lay it on the table and turn it around and put something beside it and put something under it and that kind of thing. That space that is the culture values a clean, ready to work space, and it's not just a horizontal surface to collect things. It's a sacred space that is kept that way. Has made a big difference in our organization. I know it sounds silly that we took an old crate and made a table out of it. It's a big deal, but it really
I love the metaphor. I love the fact that
it really has made a difference in culturally. In okay, let's all gather around this huge, tall table with carpeted surface, and talk about how we're going to be a world-class filter manufacturer.
But it's important that your culture respects that table needs to be used for that purpose. I've been in factories where every machine, every conveyor belt box, controller box, everything that's hanging on the wall, everything everywhere has a rounded top.
So it can't
So
receive
you
anything.
cannot put anything down on it, which tells me that they couldn't come up with a culture that says don't do this. They had to put the dome on top of everything.
every I'd say if it's 6
This
inches
big.
square,
Yeah.
that's a spot that can receive something. And
Some piece of
unfortunately,
something.
every
Yes.
precious place here is covered, and it makes me crazy. I think to prepare for this, I have an articulating belt sander, benchtop belt
Yeah.
sander,
Yeah.
and it's in the down position right now, which made it a great place to stack things I needed to get out of the way of
Right.
the podcast area.
So it's useless as a belt sander,
man.
right?
Well,
Yes.
In the laboratory, we used to say 3 of the most expensive things are true silence, true vacuum, and blank benchtop.
True vacuum, right?
There's never enough.
There's never enough.
Flat
There's
spaces.
just never enough benchtop.
Never enough. Well, on that note, I think we should wrap this one up. Thanks again, and I look forward to being back for the next one.
All right. Thanks,
Right on.
Tom.
Thanks.